Hello, today I will be reacting to The Flood Could Devour the 40k Galaxy from PancreasNoWork. You know, videos, first link in the description, and yeah, I don't have too much to say about this. Okay, first thing, I love this dude, go subscribe to him. It's infinitely better than anything I will ever make. Second off, I have decent enough knowledge of the 40k Galaxy. I know it's batshit insane. But yeah, that doesn't really matter. I don't know fuck all about Halo or the Flood. So yeah, we'll see. He'll probably tell us. So yeah, let's do this.
You knew this was coming. I kept teasing it, and if nothing else, if I
Yes, you
was
did keep
ferociously
teasing it.
fanboying over Halo for the Covenant and Forerunners, I couldn't have just ignored the faction that is pretty much responsible for everything we see in the Halo universe. I mean, come
Fascinating.
on, without them we'd have no anything. There'd still be Forerunner domination of the galaxy, and mankind would... Actually, I don't know. Part of the...
Interesting. Okay. I knew they were pretty important. I didn't know they were that important. As I said, I don't have any fucking idea about Halo lore. I like never played a single Halo game or shit.
reason for the Forerunner human war was because humanity was simultaneously retreating from and eliminating these parasites. Who knows what would have happened had they not intervened? There's something you should know, though. While I will, of course, talk about what you're likely familiar with in this miniseries, and without spoiling it too early, I'll actually give the factions in 40k some credit for once. The creatures you know...
So yeah, if I remember his previous videos, especially like the Forerunners, like yeah, they dunk on 40k, and I do know that the Forerunners kinda died to the Flood, so they probably could devour the 40k Galaxy. Like, the 40k Galaxy is being kinda actively devoured by bugs already. So that isn't a bug though. I think, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I don't know Halo.
from the original Halo trilogy were once far different from their modern iterations. What became a cruel and corruptive zombie-like hive mind was once the most dominant race in the Halo universe. And yes, I mean universe. So in a way, this is a bit of a 2-for-1 video. The first portions will largely be lore and the precursors, because in order to understand the main subject of the video,
Halo
I feel
lore.
obligated to do my best to explain what we...
Like, the only thing I really know about Halo lore are the Forerunners in the Human Covenant War, because, you know, I watched the video of this beautiful human person here.
know about them. And of course, the more I'm talking about Halo, the happier I am. I'll try not to focus on
The
them too
happier
much,
I
as
am
they were
too.
the precursors, and I'll chapter the video, so if you just want to skip to the 40k bits, feel free. But to finally stop beating around the bush
we're
on
watching
this
all
matter,
of it.
allow me to tell you how the flood of...
That's disgusting looking. That's like a tree, but a good tree with machinery. And it's inside inside a war comic, I think.
Halo could devour the 40k galaxy. But first, a word. Not from a sponsor. Haha, I fucking gotcha.
Damn.
No sponsor this one, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you all. Nearly to 100k and a new year's coming up. So, I hope everyone else has a good new year, and I hope this channel
Get him to 100k, he deserves it.
For the rest of my life aside, this has pretty much become my full-time job, and I couldn't do it without all of you. How fitting.
That's amazing. That's something I want to do at some point too. It might take a while. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
The Dexcom beep talking about insurance bullshit. But seriously, thank you all for the support. Now then, I hope you're wearing a cholesterol
I am honored.
skin, because otherwise you're in for a rough time.
I've been there since like 20k or something. This dude is like, he is my favorite Warhammer lore dude. Ew. Ew.
Unlike 40k's own devouring hive mind race, the Flood were not always, well, what I just described. They were once a race known as the Precursors. I'm tempted to describe them as the Forerunners on steroids, but that doesn't come close to what they were. Because what they really were H.P. Lovecraft gods. To say they...
I remember. They were the ones that were killed by the Forerunners one day. But that's interesting. That's something I didn't know.
They ruled the universe is a funny way of putting it because they had interesting outlooks on reality, but if they wished to, I no doubt they could have. Before I get into their tech and all that stuff you're no doubt terribly interested in, so you could explain how Cato Sicarius could one-shot them, I want to talk about them for a bit. They seeded
Damn.
life in the galaxy billions of years ago, so already we're on a timescale well past 40k's own. They could accelerate the evolution of life as fast as or as slow as they wished it to be, and the reverse was true
Just say they are God. Or they did say they were God.
as well. They would oftentimes spend their lives as devolved, humble farming races, for the form they took was of no consequence to them. One day they might decide to be Cthulhu, the next day they're Gilgamesh, and then 100,000 years later they're Farmer Brown counting his space chickens for the yearly harvest.
That's
don't
neat.
think about that sentence too much. I grew up in the suburbs, alright? They believed that the universe itself was
I
alive
won't.
in a way, only in a way and scale far different from you and me. They believed that the consciousness of living beings served to enrich the universe as a whole, a concept in Halo known as neural physics. If this is sounding like some real hippie shit to you, then you're probably right. But if the hippies are able to throw galaxies
Yes,
at you like
it does.
ping pong balls, maybe they're onto something. But before that,
Fair
think of
enough.
how they viewed
Fair
life.
enough.
They weren't good or evil.
I
strictly
never watched
speaking, yet
Gurren
they
Lagann.
considered suffering, strife, and indeed evil as necessary
Because sadly I'm a terrible, boring human person and I don't like mechas that much. I know, disappointing.
parts of life. They believed it added to its sweetness, which is the only word I can give you because whatever word they would have used didn't really cross the language barrier so goodly. Now for their tech abilities and all that good stuff. Part of what helped them be
Yes, yes, Isekai is the worst thing humanity ever invented. Except like, I think, Overlord, Mushoku Tensei, Shield Heroes, fair enough. Then Watch ReZero. I'm just gonna make a fool of myself. I'm just gonna shut up.
able to live so many different lives is that they could reincarnate and live anew. Death, after all, is just another part of life, so of course they wish to experience it every now and then. And in a rare
fair
moment
enough.
of me actually dissing the Eldar, the precursors managed to do this for billions of years without murder fucking a god into existence. Good job, precursors. They
Yes, that was appropriate. The Elder. Jesus Christ, how old is that Solaris screenshot? Is the one you can still, like... If that actually is what it looks like, and it was... I am kinda confused, but it looks like it was when you could, like, still choose your travel type. That was an eternity ago, Jesus.
They also weren't a hive mind, by the way. Not yet, anyways. So this was
Well,
straight
no.
reincarnation, not having your brainwaves vored back into a collective consciousness. They could do pretty much everything the foreigners could do. You know,
Damn.
cross into different universes, throw planets at people to piss them off, the usual. Except with the precursors,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be a planet, it'd be a
Tuesday.
galaxy. Now that's a good way to tell someone to fuck off. I'm not making that up, by the way. The foreigner known as the Didact had a freak out when he learned what they could do, i.e. throw galaxies around. Just moving them around like Minecraft blocks and creating life from nothing. Their
Well, that's
FTL methods
balanced.
were described as leaving lingering multiversal residue when they entered real space again. I have no
Oh,
idea what the
no.
hell that means, but I'm going to assume that means they just
Not
walk
the
through
Minecraft
realities to
relevant-
reach their destination like a god in a nether portal
references.
system. And there's my favorite invention of theirs as well, star roads. Now that sounds kind of boring, I admit.
Yeah,
what
it
they
does.
were roads between planets and potentially even different star systems, miles and miles thick and immune to all forms of attack. Let the scale
Ugh.
of that sink in a bit. A road
Yeah,
between
that's-
a star system.
it's
Not
pretty
like a
big.
Stellaris hypertravel lane, a physical thing. These things stretch between planets. That's something billions of miles long. And
Yeah,
these
yeah.
things were everywhere.
That's
They could also
pretty
change
big.
their mass at will. Not as in they could shed bits of themselves as required, so they were lighter or heavier. One section of the road might be 100 pounds 1 minute, the next it's 10,000, and then after that it's 10.
How would
Nothing
you even
about the
do
road
that?
was changed. There was no rearrangement. Reality has been rewritten, so this thing is now a different
Ah,
mass. That's just a
reality.
complete master of the
Makes
universe
sense.
like no other, because it's just rewriting reality on a whim. And while the precursors didn't really use them for violence, the Flood used them to strangle planets. They did that with the first arc the Foreigners built, which
Well,
was itself bigger than the one in Halo 3,
that
which was in turn
sounds
itself several dozen
fantastic.
times the size of a planet. Imagine being some foreigner just chilling out on a planet, living life, then the
I can
galactic
see it.
Autobahn comes screaming out of space and strangles your planet into a black hole before smacking your fleet out of orbit like a game of whack-a-mole.
Shut
And
the fuck
domain
up,
I
you
discussed in
cunt.
the Foreigner video was their creation. They wanted to store all they had gathered about the universe in one giant sentient supercomputer that used the very Milky Way galaxy to run itself. Aside from doubtlessly being able to run Doom,
being unable to
He was
run
also
Doom.
able to shut
You
out
know what? I'm
most
just
of
not
it
gonna
light.
say
This is why
anything.
the Foreigners, despite being able to access whatever they put into it, noticed massive blank spots of information they couldn't access. The domain itself was telling them to go to hell, they just didn't realize it. Now, if they were so powerful, how did they disappear like all ancient precursor civilizations do? Well, the Foreigners wiped them out. So how did they do that? Great
Yeah,
question.
good question.
There are several answers presented, and none of them come from a completely reliable source. What I can tell you isn't true is what the Foreigners largely believed. They thought the precursors peacefully faded away and left them in charge. That theory is historical revisionism to the highest, that Foreigner commanders spread after they murdered all the precursors to make Foreigners feel good about
that
themselves.
makes sense.
After this one, though, the theories get screwy. A precursor survivor, and I use that term very loosely, says that the Foreigners attacked them unprovoked. Imagine if every single insect in your backyard suddenly marched into your room and started devouring you. That's essentially what this kind of precursor said had happened.
That
no matter
sounds
how strong you are if you're
fun.
110% blindsided. Meanwhile, Foreigner accounts by those who actually know a bit about what happened say that instead of passing the role of guardians of all life onto the Forerunners, they were going to give it to humanity instead and genocide the Foreigners out of existence. In this version of the
I kind of doubt that. That sounds like a decent enough bit of propaganda, does it?
story, the Foreigners just got the jump on them before they could do it. So using that insect analogy again, imagine it's largely the same, only the bugs got wind that you were going to call an exterminator in a few days. There's also the possibility that many precursors simply let the Foreigners kill them because of that whole life is both joy and suffering thing they had going. Whatever the case, the specifics are both incredibly violent and lost to time, as shown by when the Didact found out just what they could do, and he freaked out and wondered how the hell the Foreigners ever beat them. Of course, this was still a race of Lovecraftian beings that only technically aren't gods. Kind of hard to kill them. And indeed,
they are gods.
Out of the Milky Way in
no,
some
technically
form or
they
another.
are.
One of the forms many of them took was as a powder that would eventually coalesce back into precursors proper. But be it the ravages of time or sabotage, something happened to this powder and it was corrupted. Instead of reforming the precursors, it created a new form of life that was hell-bent on revenge. One that
that's the Flood!
Would assimilate all into itself so that never again could its creations rise up against it. This powder, as you've no doubt guessed, became the Flood. The Warhammer scenario is coming soon, I promise, but to explain the Flood, imagine the Tyranids, okay? Now instead of them just eating
I can do that.
they shove a toddler-sized ball of popcorn in your chest and you become one of
I don't like war.
them. Everything you know of value is then assimilated into the hive mind of the Flood. Everything useless to them is discarded. Not shoved to the back of your mind, not moved around in your neurons, gone. Deleted. Error 404.
That
Fond
sucks.
childhood memories of your mother not found. The novelization of
Yeah, go fuck yourself. I wanna keep those memories.
As he desperately dredges up memories from his past that the Flood has to go through before it can find the location of Earth. As well as him constantly repeating his military identification number over and over, so he always has something to use as a shield to almost keep sane. As they grow in number, they begin harvesting corpses to form a grave mind, the true guiding intelligence of the Flood, an intelligence far beyond any AI. If there is anything remotely biological, the Flood can consume it. While there are beings in Halo that cannot be infected by the Flood due to lacking a central nervous system, most prominently the Hunters, their biomass can still be absorbed and used by it. All of your
that sounds fantastic.
Your tactics, your battle
You could even say lovely. Of course, hive mind is overpowered AF. Why wouldn't they be?
plans that you're aware of, how your logistical networks run, everything. To get back to Halo, when this powder came back, ancient humanity decided to give it to their pets to make them more attractive and fertile. I fucking wish I was kidding. I mean, is that not the first thing you think of, too? Wow, look at this cool mushroom I found in the forest. Hey, Fido, come lick it for me. I think it'll give me some real cute puppies. The lore gets weird.
Oh no.
Their puppies started getting a little silly, just a little bit wacky. Then space
not the
zombies
dogs.
happened, and ancient humanity and their allies, the ancient prophets, just gonna skip past that without explaining it, no time, waged war on the Flood. When it spread to foreigner planets, they started getting rid of those planets. For some reason, they didn't explain that there was a zombie apocalypse going on in ancient foreigner society, so they thought humanity was just randomly invading them for shits and giggles. Humanity fights a two-front war and loses, the Flood pretend to be driven off, so the foreigners think they're secure to the Flood, and then they
Damn. The Forerunner's gonna be kinda retarded for that.
or prank the foreigners by revealing that no, there's not a thing like that before reactivating all of their dormant tech to wipe the foreigners out. And it nearly worked. As the foreigners were losing ground, the Flood's absorption capabilities meant that they learned more and more about foreigner tech, as well as how to use and counter it. Every foreigner was another Flood to worry about. Classic zombie stuff. Eventually, the Flood hit critical mass and formed a key mind. If a grave mind is smart, a key mind makes Tzeentch look like Gork and Mork. It is the ultimate intelligence, capable of guiding the Flood across the galaxy.
Yeah, that sounds not terrifying at all.
simultaneously and infecting space-time itself. Yeah, the Flood have their own form of chaos corruption if you let them get out of control. As they devoured huge swaths of the galaxy, the Foreigners also learned the hard way that the Flood could control the tech they had as precursors, and that's when Foreigner planets started getting strangled by those fancy star roads. Even their AIs became infected. Remember what I said about them being smart? The key mind is so bold.
How the fuck do you infect an AI? How do you do that? How?
Intelligent that they just corrupt machines despite it being purely biological. The main Foreigner AI in charge of the military, Metacont Bias, was turned to their side after being locked in the science fiction hyperbolic time chamber with a great mind for a few years. So don't think you're safe just because you've replaced your lungs with a forge below tech priests. As for how the Flood were defeated, it was because the Halo air ray was almost accidentally designed to utilize neural physics for its firing sequence, which turned all those fancy precursor weapons into soup. It also killed everything left alive in the galaxy by that point, which meant the Flood were starved out, much like the Tyranids would have been in this situation. Unrelated, but there was a bit in the Foreigner novels where, right as the rings are being activated, the Isodidact hears the signals of a race that was just beginning to reach the stars, which is both incredibly depressing and incredibly funny. Imagine you move into a new neighborhood, and the day after you finish setting everything up, you walk outside to go say hi to your new neighbors and immediately get hit with the spirit bomb. Alright, I feel like there's more.
Wait, damn. That sounds pretty entertaining to happen, I guess.
I can say, but I'm over 8 pages of script into the video, and I haven't started the actual Warhammer crossover bit. Didn't plan on this video just being half Halo lore, but here we are. So, how would the Flood fare in the 40k galaxy?
From what I see, everything's fucking dead. Like, all of it.
I won't be doing the precursors themselves as they were, because to be frank, I think it'd just be a guaranteed win for them. They'd leave the galaxy and toss another one at it. If they failed, they'd do it again and again and again. Or just create a race with the sole purpose of influencing the warp and creating their own chaos god, if not outright descending themselves to become of the old ones. More so than they already were anyways.
Ah, I bet you the hive mind chaos god. Ah. No, I am still traumatized from Sinish.
Now, if you look at the title of this video, which I assume you did, you probably noticed the big glaring could in the title. Because unlike the Covenant and Forerunners, I don't think the Flood is guaranteed to either hold their ground or sweep the galaxy. They could do either, but to show you what I mean, let's start with Scenario 1.
Well, I am interested because I don't see how you'd survive against that. He'll probably explain it.
It's wiped from the galaxy pretty quickly. Let's start the scenario off on an Imperial world. Doesn't matter much which it is. Don't worry about how it got there, it's not important. It shut off a Flood ship on their way across the multiverse to go curb stomp some Foreigner or something. Don't think about it. What's important is what it's gonna do, namely infect some poor schmuck on his way to work or something like that. Could be a hive world, could be an agri world, doesn't matter. Rapidly, the Flood begins to infect others as it does. It can spread through spores in the atmosphere as well as the popcorn balls. It's just that either for technical or balancing reasons, it never does this in the Halo games, if only so the Arbiter doesn't get turned into a zombie when he shows up to give you a lift out of high charity in Halo 3. But that does mean...
Again, fair enough, dying for no reason doesn't sound that fun.
That even if you don't get caught by infection forms, you're still joining their ranks when the air turns to cancer. Now, taking into account both the Flood's capabilities and my intense favoritism of Halo, I'm gonna say this scenario is in the middle of the three in terms of which is most likely to happen. It also relies heavily on one thing: competent Imperial officials.
That isn't the word that exists. You just made that up.
against them. That would be cool. I don't care if it's unbalanced. It'd be fucking awesome.
Yes.
Now,
I
scenario
want it.
3, the one that is both the situation I think is most likely and the one that is going to once more rear accusations of me being a biased Halo fan. To address that
Yes,
second one
it's going
first,
to.
yes. Now let the jerking off of Halo commence.
Let's do this!
The Flood begins on a planet and completely devours it. Unlike Scenario 1, the Imperium
No.
or Tau or whoever is in charge cannot eradicate the threat, and it begins rapidly spreading across the sector. Aside from them gaining strength in numbers as they grow, the main issue is their assimilation. Everything they assimilate not only gives them that creature's abilities and knowledge, but enhances their strength and agility as well. It's how a standard UNSC Marine that's infected can slap the Master Chief across the map despite him being a goddamn demigod of war. Additionally, them being perfectly able to use the tech of a race they assimilate means that if you don't eliminate the Flood with an arrow,
Oh, that's gonna be disgusting when you take, like, some of these Necron tags. Blah.
send after them, they're going to know how to deal with you after the fact. The Flood Hive Mind begins as a proto-grave mind, a largely defenseless blob creature. That being said, once one of these things are formed, the Flood vastly increases in intelligence, and it will undoubtedly make itself impossible to reach, or at least as close to impossible as it can, therefore ensuring the Flood's intellectual capabilities rise alongside their
It's
physical
not
ones.
retarded.
As for how a single Flood spore can grow to take over a whole species, it's the same way as every zombie thing ever, their exponential growth. 1 begets 2, begets 4, begets a whole fucking lot more. I think the Imperium's massive scale would screw them over in this case, in both the large scale
it
and the small
definitely
scale.
would.
In the small scale, I mean that literally in the case of all the big shit that they build. Imagine a single Flood spore getting into a knight. With just a single infection form or airborne spore, the Flood have a death machine. Now scale that up to a Titan Legion. Much like Nurgle and the Tyranids to some extent, they create a biosphere to spread themselves with. It even looks like a Nurglite Chaos infection, funnily enough. All sick and gross and nasty ass looking.
Yeah, I just noticed that they're basically just fucking everywhere.
So any guardsmen deployed to a Flood-infested world might just find themselves feeding the Gravemind. The Flood also have their own pure forms that are more than capable of holding their own in a fight. You've got Stalkers, the ranged things they turn into that shoot needles at you, the Flood tank, and of course the Flood Juggernaut. It was cut from Halo 2, and that's probably for the best,
boa
because beating
hentai
that thing on Legendary would make me cry. The Boulevard of Jackal Snipers is already bad enough, but in terms of Warhammer, this thing is more of a damn dreadnought. It's the size of one, and it hits like one. On top of all the other crap they got.
Well, that's just
Halo Wars 2.
fantastic.
I mean, look at these things. Ugh. Just to go a bit more into their infectious capabilities I mentioned earlier, it's important to remember that Foreigner AIs are fully sentient artificial people, at least in terms of how advanced they are. If the Flood can infect those, I see no reason the Flood would have any issues infecting machine spirits once it devotes effort to it. They might not even need to infect the pilot of a Knight or Titan, for instance, just its machine spirit. And if nothing else, part of the reason Medican Bias was corrupted by the Flood is because the Keymind convinced him to turn against the Forerunners. Some machine spirits are pretty damn close to just being AI if they aren't already, and the Flood Mind is so goddamn charismatic that it can convince them to betray the Imperium. This charisma naturally being helped by a healthy dose of corruption. And if you're thinking that something like this might take a while, remember the Flood are capable of infecting space-time itself. Even if it were to be the case that the Keymind has to individually talk to every
hyperbolic time chamber.
Single Titan spirit for years on end, that's not as much of a problem when the year-long conversation takes place over the course of about 5 minutes. And depending on how prevalent machine spirits truly are, the Imperium is even more fucked. A lot of what the Imperium calls machine spirits are actually just something like programs and stuff, like a computer nowadays, so that's not that big of an issue. The Flood can probably infect it with the ye olde computer virus and make it not work, but that's just a single piece of equipment.
Bonzi.exe. It's gonna force you to open another 10 million instances of itself.
Not working. No, well. But if the other end of that scale is true, and AI is truly a part of almost every major piece of Imperial equipment, the Flood may very well
then the Imperium is fucked. Beyond belief.
Start a second Men of Iron rebellion. And as far as things like servitors go, they can just infect those the old-fashioned way of popcorn ball to the spinal column. That's a computer and a person infected all at once. Just eat the guy plugged into the battleship's navigation system, and you've not only got yourself a pilot, you know how to pilot every other ship of its type. As the Flood infest more and more of space, they only become more and more powerful. There's no spreading themselves out too thin here. Much like the Tyranids, the Flood hive mind can be directing an entire battlefield all at once. However, it's much harder to disrupt the Keymind's presence amongst the Flood. There's far less in the way of synapse creatures amongst the Flood, so you can't just shoot the big one and the Flood all turn into mindless beasts. At best, you can destroy the Gravemind overseeing the Flood, but there's a couple of problems with that. Problem 1, the Gravemind doesn't even need to be on.
I'd like to see you try.
the same planet to direct the flood, and a key mind undoubtedly has an even larger range as well. Problem 2, the grave mind is minimum the size of a damn titan. Some things I've read say its body might be hundreds of kilometers large, and if that's the case, nothing short of an orbital bombardment is killing that thing. Either way, you're gonna need some big guns to kill it. Problem 3, it's not just a giant blob. A proto-grave mind is, but a grave mind proper isn't, and in this scenario, the flood are long past the stage of proto-grave mind. A grave mind, meanwhile, can launch things across space if it needs to. As in, pick up a flood combat form, stuff it in a fleshy drop pod, and just catapult that bitch across the solar system. It does it in Halo 3 pretty frequently in the last level. Aside from that meaning that it can theoretically spread infections across the system it's in without even needing to send any proper flood combat forms there, there's the much more direct issue of if it can do that, anything that tries to fight it is going to be turned into a Dark Souls bloodstain real goddamn quickly. Good luck fat rolling around this thing. As for the larger scale working against the Imperium, the Flood absorb their enemies as they do. The problem this poses for the Imperium is that there's a whole lot of people to infect, and as I keep saying, everyone infected is another Imperial that's now working against it. It's kind of like how in the World War Z book, China kept throwing men at zombies, not knowing that every time they lost a man, they gained a zombie.
Why would he do that? That's incredibly retarded.
Fight, or rather not really caring, which I doubt the Imperium would either, given that it's the Imperium. Hell, if the Flood begins somewhere in the Ghoul Stars or another region of space uncharted to the Imperium, it might grow to critical mass, and then suddenly entire swaths of Imperial space are under attack by the parasite. Additionally, the Flood are more than capable of figuring out how to repurpose equipment to suit itself, and in the case of 40k, there is a lot of hive worlds, forge worlds, and more that can be taken over to produce armaments and ships for the Flood.
Well, that's just lovely. We're gonna have the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. A fucking hive mind. Oh, that's just beautiful.
The know-how of doing this is figured out by the hive mind. It's endless supplies of stuff for the Flood to produce to help their war effort. War effort, never-ending buffet, same difference, you know? And something I think is pretty neat is that I think it's likely the Flood will produce the exact same issue as a Tyranid hive fleet invasion, the Shadow of the Warp. It is, after all, a massively complex and overreaching intelligence stretching across time and space. Who's to say that the Flood can do the same thing as the Nids in this case?
Would be helpful.
Against the Flood, the Psychers go insane because some asshole won't stop speaking in iambic pentameter at them every time they try to use magic. No matter what the Imperium throws at the Flood, in this scenario it can't be stopped. World after world falls to it until they have devoured the majority of the Imperium, and mankind's fate is sealed along with the rest of the galaxy. The ever-present orcs will only present more food and soldiers for the Flood. The schemes of the Eldar are no match for the intelligence of the Keymind. Clearly, the Tau will survive and repopulate the galaxy, and I can't even finish this joke. They get stomped. Straightforward. Space and time itself will begin to corrupt itself into a living hell, potentially preventing demons from manifesting in real space. This same issue will also plague the Tyranids. If space and time are absolutely Smeckledorf, then the Tyranids' travel across the galaxy can be splintered and disrupted enough to make them easy pickings. Regardless, as industrial centers fall and armies are infected, the Flood will have more than enough manpower to handle Tyranid hive fleets. Kamara and the Black Library likely won't even be safe, as the moment a Webway Gate is found, it's time to go ballistic with the Flood spores. Even the forces of chaos will be forced to bow to the unending tide of the parasite pouring across the galaxy, with cultists and marines being infected and turned while demons are gunned down by their former servants. As for the endgame, the Flood will begin to finish with the rest of the holdouts amongst the galaxy. Depending on how powerful the Flood's absorption really is, there's a very real chance they might develop Psyker powers, in which case the precursors as they were are back now, just a lot grosser. You may say that being the god that he is, the Emperor could handle the Flood, and individually
he could handle probably any singular thing of the Flood. But there's never a singular thing of the Flood.
Of course, that's true. There's no Flood form that'll manage to harm him. But as a god, he is weakened as his worshippers die off. And as the Flood consumes more and more...
I am looking forward to that discussion in the comments, whether the Emperor's a god.
Not only will he lose worshippers that deprive him of power, which to note is the same issue the Chaos Gods will face, he will also receive less and less Psychers to empower him. The daily dose of Psychers he needs to sustain himself will dwindle from the thousands, to the hundreds, to the dozens, to finally none. The end of the Imperium in this scenario may not come from a Flood invasion of Terra, but a warp storm as he finally dies and chaos overtakes the cradle of man. As for the Necrons, you might think they'll be the inheritors of the galaxy, as robotic beings should be relatively
They do better than the other ones. Still dead though.
perfectly safe, but this won't be so. The average Necron warrior could potentially be infected by the Flood's logic plagues they use to infect the machinery of other races. Even disregarding that, the Flood aren't just predators like the Tyranids, they're hateful. They want an unending hell of subjugation for all life. And the Necrons, while not technically alive anymore, are not likely to be spared the wrath of the insane remnants of the precursors.
They're not going
As
to
the
be.
Flood takes over the industrial centers of other realms, it will turn them towards the Necrons to eliminate them. It will learn the secrets of the Necrons' ultimate weapons and turn them against not only them, but the Catan, some of the only beings capable of threatening them that in their sharded state will be easy pickings for a massed Flood invasion. As the last of the mortal beings in the galaxy are consumed, on multiple levels it becomes an unrecognizable hell. Not only are infected planets turned into flood worlds covered in their biomass, but space and time itself warp beyond recognition. The library in the Foreigner trilogy mentions that looking at the stars, they looked off somehow. Whatever the Flood were doing as they were wiping out the Forerunners, they were causing the galaxy to become wrong on a fundamental level. However they managed to do it, the end result is the galaxy becoming something closer to hell than anything we would know. Physics are entirely rewritten, much like how their star roads could rewrite reality to change their mass, and life may very well become impossible. Any chaotic incursions attempting to combat the Flood are dealt with easily, either by the unending tide of combat forms banishing them back to the warp, or because once in real space, demons need to at least somewhat follow the laws of physics, the Flood can simply rewrite these laws to be to their advantage. The Eye of Terror will more than likely end up closed, as will the Great Rift, whether that be due to the Flood being able to build something similar to the Necron pylons, or the sheer psychic weight of the Flood hive mind shutting it down like the Tyranid shadow in the warp. Either way, the end result is the same. As the last of their followers and mortal beings they draw sustenance from are infected, the Chaos Gods begin to wither and fade. The 40k galaxy is subsumed into the Flood. It may have taken another 40,000 years from the days of the Human Covenant War, and 140,000 years from when they nearly consumed the galaxy the first time around, but their victory is inevitable.
Damn.
We exist together now.
Shut the hell up.
Corpses in one grave.
And with that, I am done with the 3 Halo Hammer videos. I do hope you've all enjoyed the video series, as it was very fun.
Yes, I did.
As I've said many a time,
It was fantastic, because I didn't know anything about
Halo.
Halo.
Make fun of me elsewhere on the internet, or in the comment section. I don't advise that one for your sake, because it'll just boost me in the algorithm and keep my garbage opinions I hate so much floating around. But if
Yes,
you really want to let me know
comment
how
on this
unbelievably
video.
stupid I am for these videos, then go for it. Don't think I'm done with Halo yet, of course. There's all sorts of lore videos about them I'd love to make. Between
And
this
I
series and
look
the one about
forward
the
to
Human
it.
Covenant War, it's been proven to me that people will watch it. I think next time I dive into Halo, we'll take a look at your friendly neighborhood office of naval intelligence. They do
Let's go.
Imperium would say is too much, but that'll be
What?
sometime in the future. This was quite the long video, as you can probably tell, so I'll
Yes,
be taking a break from
I
Halo
did.
for now. Not for too long, of course, but long enough to get back to what you expect from a Warhammer channel. You know, Warhammer, and maybe some stuff about
Blue
a phone
Boys.
company, if I have time. Thank you as always to
I didn't get that reference, sadly. But yeah, as always, fantastic video of this beautiful, beautiful guy. Get him to 100k, do it. Do it now! And yeah, also maybe subscribe to me or something, I don't fucking care.